Okay, all right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Derek Adams. Background in oil and gas. I guess so why should you listen to me today instead of being on your phone? So I have a PhD in geoscience, but I'm not holding that, against myself. And then I was in oil and gas for about 10 years before then starting a geothermal company. We ran that for about 4 years, and now I'm actually with an energy nonprofit called the Permian Energy Development Lab, and we touch kind of all forms of energy. So I know a little bit about this, and I've kind of lived it at a startup. It was sort of my entire being for like 4 years. So hopefully I have some wisdom to convey to y'all. I would say that just like housekeeping, if you have questions, Annika's really going to keep us on time. So I'll try, feel free to jump in if it's, let's address it, right? Instead of holding questions till the end. But if it gets too bad, then she'll yell at us and we'll keep going, okay? So the pre-reading, some of these are really dense, heavy reports. One of them is a summary. I would highly recommend the summary if you haven't read it and if you want more information. But if you want to dig further, check out the Future Geothermal in Texas report. It's pretty exhaustive. And frankly, Jamie Beard, who runs now Project Interspace, she used to be at UT, had a really good TED talk on just kind of her thesis, which is to encourage oil and gas to kind of, focus and come to bear on geothermal. So questions on the pre-reading that everyone definitely did? Yeah? No? Okay. All right, let's jump in. Okay, you know the problem. There's not enough power. We need more, and we need to be reliable. Okay, I don't think we need to talk about why Texas needs energy, right? Dispatchable power, obviously, right, is pretty critical. Be good to know when that energy is available so you can dispatch it at the grid scale. So let's jump through. So this is a common misconceptions. Did you make this slide? I make this slide.
You made it.
Oh, okay. So geothermal, traditionally, what is geothermal? I guess let's back up a second. Right? Geo, earth, thermal. Let's see, thermal heat. Right? So it's heat. Leveraging the heat from the earth. When you think about geothermal, you probably think of, geysers, volcanoes, right? Hot coming out of the ground. And so the misconception is that's the only place you can do geothermal. And as it turns out, you could do geothermal below this room. Right? As you drill down into the earth, it gets hotter for a couple different reasons. One, it's hotter near the core, but two, radioactive decay in the crust constantly produces heat. Don't worry, it's not radioactive in that sense. But anyway, anywhere you drill, you're gonna find heat. So it can be done anywhere from a technical standpoint. What's the next? So you don't necessarily need hot water. So a lot of people think, well, you need steam, you need hot water. Well, there are a lot of different ways of extracting heat energy from the subsurface. Water is one way, right? Water is a good way to transfer. It flows. You can move it around. It's kind of like the wires, or I guess it's the electrons in the wires, but in the thermal world. But you don't need it. There's lots of cool stuff that you can do to extract the heat. And then it's niche and not scalable. Geothermal is definitely scalable, especially a lot of the new technologies coming out right now. As the cost curves are driven down, it is highly scalable across the entire planet, but definitely in Texas. So we'll touch on this now. Really, the technology that you use needs to be matched with temperature of the geothermal resource. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this, but it's basically a thermometer, and the hotter. Oh, I didn't know it was animated. The hotter it is, you may use a different type of technology, or in this case, a different type of power plant to generate electricity, right? So at the high end, it's like steam coming out of the ground, right? Like many hundreds of degrees. But as you go down, as you go down the temperature scale, you need to use different technologies to still generate electricity from that heat. And I won't get into the details in here, but in general, when you get down to the lower temperature resources, you need to use what's called a binary cycle power plant. In both of these two power plants, you're actually using the water to turn into steam. Well, so it's not steam underground, right? It's under pressure, just like your car's radiator, unless you have a Tesla. So you're right, it's under pressure so that it's above the boiling point of water, but it stays a fluid because it's held under pressure. Same within the earth, right? And so when you bring it to the surface, you relieve that pressure, that steam expands. The expansion of the steam spins a turbine, right? I think you guys know a little bit about power generation. In a binary cycle plant, you are using a different fluid. And so all you're really doing is flowing that hot water you bring to the surface through a heat exchanger that uses another fluid that boils at a lower temperature. And then that's actually what expands, spins the turbine. Okay? We don't need to go into the other. So then as you move down the temperature spectrum, right, then if you're not going to use it for power, right, what else can you use heat for? Well, you could use it for heating and cooling a building, right? Maybe your house, maybe a campus, right? And this is, we'll talk about this, but this is what's known as ground source heat pumps. And so this is where you have, basically pipes buried in the shallow ground, say 6 feet down, right? And if you've ever been in a cave or if you've ever been underground, you know that the year-round temperature stays the same all year, right? And so the way that this works for heating and cooling is that in the summer, the ground stays cool. And we can use that to, as a way to keep your building cold. And in the winter, the ground stays warm. And you can use that to heat your home, right? So that's at the low temperature spectrum. Then apparently you can make cheese as you go up into the higher temperatures. You can, but basically, food related stuff. Textiles needs this stuff. That cement, making cement is a thermal process. A lot of sort of industrial processes require heat, right? And so direct use is pretty important. You can even do things like make hydrogen. All right, so let's talk about the resources here in Texas. So, as I said, anywhere you drill, heat increases with depth, right? But then why does this map have different colors on it? Why is it more red here? Why is it hotter here and hotter over here? But it's kind of cold here, and that has to do with the underlying geology, the actual rocks, right? So when you can imagine that as varied as the landscape is today, rivers over here, an ocean here, mountains here, that happened through time. So that as you drill down, you're going backwards in time, and each layer represents a different time, right? Well, in an earlier period of time, geologic time, we may have been in a shallow sea, right? And so the type of rock you're going to get is different in a shallow sea, right? You might get limestone because of a reef, rather than sandstone because you were in a river today. That underlying geology is essentially what controls the spatial distribution of heat in the subsurface. Okay, and it can be very complex, but that's ultimately that's why. And so just to look at that map, you'd say, well, we can only do geothermal here and here and here. Well, this is a single depth slice, right? So if you went deeper in this area, then it would also get hotter, right? But the deeper you go, the deeper the well has to be drilled, the more expensive the well is, right? So there are trade-offs here. Most of these temperatures, you really need to get about 125C, 150C and above, and that's about 300F, to be in really the economic kind of realm if you want to use it for power. Okay? It doesn't mean you can't make power down in the lower temperatures, but it's just very inefficient. So what this would say, if this was PowerPoint and not a Google thing that messed up the text, that's the thing. So keep in mind, there's going to be a lot of text on these slides, okay? And I did that intentionally because I wanted this to be something that if you want to come back to it, you can actually read it yourself, and you have the context of what in the world I was trying to say during the presentation. So this essentially says that, look, heat is everywhere. It's not necessarily exploitable everywhere. Or it may be more expensive to exploit it in some places rather than others. So let's talk about kind of the different types of technologies. Conventional hydrothermal systems, so hydro, water, thermal, hot, it's hot water systems. This is a cross section of the Earth. So think, a cake, right? And you're slicing vertically through the Earth, and you're looking at the side of the Earth. Yeah, that's what a cross section is. And so this is where, in those more volcanic areas, right? You've probably heard of the Ring of Fire, other than the Johnny Cash song, but the Ring of Fire around the Pacific, right? Where there's a bunch of volcanoes. Essentially, where tectonic plates come together, you get volcanism, right? You get hot rocks. Not necessarily everywhere, and in some places it happens in the middle of plates, like Hawaii is a hot spot. There's no plate boundary there. But the deal here with conventional systems is that you have some source of heat near the surface. Okay, think a magma chamber of a volcano, and you can see that this cross section is showing a layer of rock that's like going it's going wacky, right? It's like folded, it's probably faulted and broken, right? That means that like the geology here is complicated because there's a lot of forces going on in the Earth, and it's not as layer cake, right? As maybe some other places. And so what you end up with is a lot of fractures in the rock, okay? Natural fractures, and those are conduits for water that is circulated naturally through the Earth to flow, pick up heat, and then can be reached with a well. Right? So you basically drill a well into these fractures, the hot water flows into the well, you bring the hot water to the surface, turn it into power, use it however you want, and then you would re-inject that. Right? So that's kind of the conventional way of doing things, and that's largely, the question is like, why isn't geothermal, more prevalent in the energy arena? And largely because in the technology and frankly the costs drove developers of geothermal power to the easy places, right? To the places where the heat was really close to the surface, to where the wells were cheap, right? To where it was just easy to do with the technology that we had at the time. Ground source heat pumps, I just talked about these. The only reason I bring them up here is they kind of get lumped in with geothermal, right? So when, and in some sense, that's okay, but we need to be a little careful when someone says, well, that neighborhood has geothermal, right? What it has are ground source heat pumps, right? It has pipes buried 6 feet down under the ground. What it is unlikely to have is a well that's drilled to 10,000 feet that's then generating power, right? Not that you couldn't do that in a neighborhood, but
it's coming.
Yeah, well, we'll see. So let's talk about some of the newer technology. So enhanced geothermal systems, also the E is also sometimes referred to engineered geothermal systems. But essentially what is done in EGS is you are the developer, the driller, the geothermal company, is creating fractures in the subsurface as the conduit, as the pathway to circulate fluids underground, right? So in conventional systems, those fractures were already there. And in EGS, they're making those fractures. Is it fracking? If you'd like to use the F word, that's fine. You can also call it stimulation, right? It's hydraulic stimulation. So it depends on who you're talking to, what word you use. But that's really what they're doing here. And it's only been recently that this technology has transferred from oil and gas into the geothermal world. Not that they haven't tried it in the past, but the expertise from fracking, and Ben will talk more about this, during the shale revolution for oil and gas, really, they learned a lot. And they got really good at controlling where those fractures go in the subsurface, controlling how big they are, the direction, the orientation, that kind of thing. I mean, it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but that's what companies like Fervo, which you probably have heard, they just went public, are doing. Okay, they're taking oil and gas technology, for the most part, in the unconventional space, unconventional oil and gas, and using it in geothermal. So that's EGS. Closed loop, also sometimes called AGS, which is kind of a garbage can term because it just means advanced geothermal. I suppose everything's advanced. But so I like to say a little more about what it is, and it's closed loop. This is where you drill a well, and you actually don't do any fracking. You don't do any circulating of a fluid in the subsurface. You're only circulating, this is like a blow up, but it's basically of the well. You flow fluid down like a center of a pipe of the well, and then the fluid will come back up the outside of that pipe. So you're just circulating fluid within that well, okay? And so what does that give you? Well, there's, as you will learn during this presentation, there are pros and cons to everything, okay? The pros of a closed loop system is you don't care if there's a fluid in the subsurface. You don't have to make fractures. You don't have, in some sense, you're kind of agnostic to what the geology is, other than having to drill the well. And you get to control what that fluid is. And you'll probably be using a fluid that's not water. A fluid that, Brandon, we were talking about this earlier, a fluid that is better at absorbing heat, for instance, than water. And it can stay, it's not open, it's closed loop, even closed loop at the surface. So you could use fluids that would normally be used to generate power in the power plant, in the turbine. You could take that and flow that same fluid down into the subsurface. Why is that good? It helps with efficiency. Because the con of closed loop systems is you're relying on conduction of heat into that pipe, right? You're relying on, there's hot rock on the outside of the pipe, and it's touching it, and that heat has to go through that pipe and then into the fluid that you're flowing through. Okay? Whereas with EGS or with conventional systems, it's convecting. You're flowing. When you're flowing the earth through like lots of different fractures, there's a lot of surface area. It's touching a lot of that hot rock, the fluid, right? And so it's just more efficient at getting the heat, whereas this is just frankly less efficient. But you can do it just about anywhere, right? Because you don't really care what the rocks are doing. Yeah.
So how deep is the well?
So it comes down to how deep do you need to go to the temperatures that you need to do what you want to do with it. So if you want to make power, you'd have to go to the right depth to get to 300 degrees Fahrenheit.
So what's the deepest?
Give you some numbers. So it is. The geologist's answer is always it depends, but it will depend. And let's see. So Fervo's new well that just hit 280 C, was like 550 degrees F, pretty hot well. They went 10,000, 11,000 feet. Okay, that's pretty shallow. So the map I showed you of the heat in Texas was at 20,000 feet. Oil and gas drills, 30,000 foot wells. What was that Sage well they used in Stark County? It's like 30,000 foot well.
That was originally a natural gas well.
Yeah. I mean, not for their test, but for the original well. So yeah, very deep, very deep. Okay, and this is frankly not an all-inclusive list, right? So I hit the highlights here, and I'm actually including some of these. This is not the all-inclusive list. There's all kinds of new innovation happening in the space. Hybrid systems, this is like where, so you've got all these different technologies. Let's put them together, right? Maybe they synergize with each other, and not just the corporate buzzword synergize, but like actually work well together to maybe increase the efficiency of what you're doing. You can use them for energy storage. We're talking a lot about reusing oil and gas wells. Energy storage, and it depends on how you're doing it. You could use it as, you could store heat underground. So the earth is a really good thermos, right? It's very insulating. And so you could store heat and then bring it back when you need it. You could store pressure, right? So you could sort of pressurize the subsurface, and then when you need that energy, release the pressure, and it comes back, and you can retrieve that energy. Super hot rock, this is something, in some sense, maybe the holy grail of geothermal, and that's getting down to temperatures where water is actually a supercritical fluid. And so what that means is that it acts like, it flows like a gas, but acts like a liquid. So it's let's just say the energy density, it's just like, it gives you a lot of energy. The challenge with a lot of geothermal is that at lower temperatures, the conversion efficiency to get from heat to power is very inefficient. I think 10%, right? Compared to like a natural gas turbine or some other nuclear, which are all thermal power generation, right? They're at maybe like 40, 50%. But that's because it's hotter. So the hotter you are, the more efficient it is to turn that heat into power. Okay? So there's a lot going on in the space. Some of these are early stage. Some of them are being tested right now in the state. So Texas is a pincushion of wells. Okay, this map is not even all the wells in Texas. Okay, so over 100 years of drilling means that we know a lot about what's underground. Right, we've drilled all these wells. All that data is public after 2 years. And so there's a lot of information about what's going on in the subsurface in Texas, which gives us a head start. Right? Also, there's just a lot of capability. We talked about oil and gas. Oil and gas has been drilling wells for 100 years. They've gotten very good at trying to understand what's going on in the subsurface, analyzing how fluids flow in the subsurface. Obviously, oil and gas, they're talking more about oil and gas. But so the ability to drill wells, drill them, cheaper, better, faster, the technology that comes out of oil and gas, and the workforce, right? This is essentially the thesis of Jamie Beard at Project Interspace, which is, Texas is poised to be the leader, frankly, probably globally in geothermal, because we've got the rocks, we got the people, we got the technology. Power prices, I don't know. We'll get there. Okay? We'll see. But so, tons of subsurface information. Now, I'm not gonna say that every single geothermal well, every single oil and gas well, is necessarily going to give you what you want, right? So they're being drilled for a different purpose. They're collecting data that is maybe not as meticulous as is needed as for the understanding of what the geothermal potential would be for that. So the main obvious thing is something called bottom hole temperature. It's like, how hot is it on the bottom of the hole, right? Bottom of the well. And even that data sometimes, has to be, let's just say, finesse to make sure that it's accurately representing what was going on. But lots of information. All right, so then from a technology standpoint, what does technology do to help geothermal scale? It needs to do one or more of these three things. It needs to lower cost, right? Okay. It needs to reduce risk, right? and or increase output, or increase the ability for us to harvest the energy. And if it's not doing one of those three things, it's interesting. It's a science project, though. It's not something that is entirely useful yet. Yeah. So things like drilling. The faster you drill, the cheaper it is. Okay? You're paying rig crews a daily rate to drill a well. If you can drill it in 10 days instead of 20, there you go, right? If you design a drill bit that is better, drills the rock better, faster, then there's something that again, speed, right? Speed of drilling. Reservoir. So if you are smarter about how you fracture that rock in an enhanced geothermal development, right? If you are smarter about connecting your producer and injector well, right? And making sure that the fractures are doing what you want it to do, right? That's gonna help you out. That's gonna increase output, actually. There's a lot going on. You can drill lots of different wells. The other thing, those are more there's a lot on the subsurface. The surface is also very important. So every geothermal, the power plant, the surface facility is like half the cost of a geothermal power plant, of a geothermal development. And so being smarter, now you can't break the rules of physics, thermodynamics is a thing, but coming up with new ways of converting that heat energy into electricity, for instance. And that's basically mechanical engineering. So using some of these new working fluids like supercritical CO2 and things like that. So, I basically just said this, but about half the cost of a geothermal development is wells. It's drilling the wells, okay? And we're looking for about 150 C or more. There's a lot of money. Drilling wells costs a lot of money. So there's a decent amount of cost at the outset of a geothermal development that is unlike other unlike other energy sources. Let's put it that way. Okay, other renewable energy sources. Go faster. Thank you. And that's what this chart says. The red is cost, and this is like so. This is risk and cost. Geothermal has high risk up front, high cost up front. Investors don't like that. Okay, so they're harder to finance than most projects. Okay, because you got to drill wells to know what you got, till you know what you got. But you want to get a PPA, right? First, and they say, El Paso Electric says, well, how much power can you generate? Well, I gotta drill the wells first before I can tell you how much power I can generate. They're like, well, great. Well, we'll give you a PPA when you know how much you can produce. You're like, well, I need to raise money to drill those wells, and I need a PPA to be able to raise money, right? PPA is securing future revenue for a project. So I'm not going to get financing for those wells. A little bit of a rock and a hard place, kind of chicken and the egg that geothermal has. And that largely, we'll go into it later towards the end, but that, frankly, in a nutshell, is probably the biggest challenge for geothermal. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Ben. Talk more about what Texas is doing. You don't have to clap. No, I'm not done. I'm not done. I'm coming back at the end to talk, so then you can.
Well done. Wow, what a smart guy. I feel nervous following Dr. Adams. Well, first, I've got a lot of in common with all of you. In 1985, I was a staffer for the Senate back in the 69th session. I then went to law school, came back to Austin and got involved in public policy and eventually found my way to the Texas Oil and Gas Association, which was then known as the Texas Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association. And I said, we got to change that. And so I created or named the Texas Oil and Gas Association because no one knew what the hell mid-continent meant, and it was just ridiculous. And then so I ran governmental affairs for the oil and gas industry for about 22 years, and then went into private practice in 2011. And among other clients, I represent the geothermal energy industry and a few geothermal energy companies. Our association is called the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance, but we're the umbrella association for the geothermal energy industry. That's the wrong way. Okay, imagine tapping an unlimited, perpetual, ongoing, pollution-free heat source that is actually enough to power the planet millions of times over without running out, and which doesn't produce emissions. Geothermal energy is that heat source. Geothermal energy is the heat energy which emanates from the center of the Earth, from the middle of our planet. The center of the Earth is as hot as the sun. Let me say that again. The center of our planet is as hot as the sun. Think about that amount of energy. And it's not 93 million miles away. It's right underneath our feet. Now, the crust of the Earth does two really cool things. One is it acts like a layer of insulation, right? So we all don't fry up like insects on a hot skillet. But it also acts as a planet-sized battery that harvests and stores all of that energy. The Earth's accessible energy, and you would know this if you read the first reading assignment for the executive summary. So this isn't me as an advocate for geothermal energy talking. This is what our leading universities from Texas have concluded and published. The Earth's accessible geothermal energy is more than 50,000 times greater than the global amount of oil, gas, and coal combined. And it's essentially inexhaustible because it emanates from the core of the Earth perpetually for the entire foreseeable future as long as humanity is likely to exist. Unless, as Stephen Hawking recommends, that we go find another planet. But for now, it's with us forever. We, humanity, has relied on the much smaller subsurface resource, hydrocarbons. And again, I'm all for oil, gas, and hydrocarbons, but we've relied on the far smaller resource all through the Industrial Revolution in the modern times, while the way bigger resource has been largely untapped. I got to figure out how to do this. There we go. So here's a chart that compares hydrocarbons, oil, gas, coal, etc., fission fuels, and crustal geothermal energy. On the left-hand side, under the magnifying glass, is all hydrocarbons. It's under a magnifying glass because by comparison, it's about the size of 1 pixel. The blue line is all fission materials. The giant orange line is crustal geothermal energy. We've got about 630 zettajoules. Dr. Adams could explain a zettajoule, but it's got a whole lot of zeros. We got about 630 zettajoules of hydrocarbons. We got about 361,000 zettajoules of fission materials. We got 15 million zettajoules of geothermal energy. And again, when you burn oil and gas or you use fission materials, it's gone. Geothermal keeps emanating perpetually. Now in Texas, the heat energy in the subsurface of Texas surpasses the world's total annual energy consumption. Texas's available energy is about 500,000 times its annual electricity generation, or it's equivalent to about 163 trillion barrels of oil. And that's just in Texas. There's enough geothermal energy to meet our electric and thermal needs forever, depending on how expansive you want to think about our potential to exist. So geothermal energy is the next step, in my opinion, in humanity's energy future. I'm all for small modular nuclear. I'm all for all sources of energy, hydrogen, etc. But in reality, I think this is the big, promising next big step, right? Prometheus gave humans fire, right? The fire thief, that's a myth that exists in all cultures in one form or another all over the world. Fire and steam drove the Industrial Revolution in modern times. Our most recent big step was the shale revolution, pioneered right here in Texas. Texas in the world is at the beginning of a geothermal energy revolution that's going to be as big or bigger than the shale revolution. See, geologists always knew that there are huge amounts of oil and gas trapped in shale rock. The problem was how to get it out. Well, Mitchell Energy solved that in 2000. And then it exploded, right? There was industrial espionage. There was people buying and trading and selling formulas, etc. Texas brought on, through the shale revolution, essentially another Saudi Arabia of oil. In my opinion, the same thing's going to happen with geothermal energy, because we've always known that there's huge amounts of heat in the ground. The question is, how do you turn it into electricity? Well, we've now figured that out, as Dr. Adams just talked about. So, what is Texas doing to support geothermal energy? Texas has gotten behind geothermal energy, in my opinion, in a really big way. It's in 2023 and last session, and hopefully going forward. The Texas legislature has adopted a series of bills in order to create the framework for a predictable governmental and regulatory and legal framework, sorry for being repetitious, if you will, for the geothermal energy industry to proliferate here in Texas. The first thing that was necessary was to answer the question, who owns the heat, right? There was no case law on that question. No court had ever decided who owns the heat. Why? Well, because cases are fought over money, and no one had ever fought over geothermal before because no one was making any money from it. So we didn't have any court that said that it belongs to the mineral estate or that it belongs to the surface estate. Moreover, there was a law that was passed by the legislature in 1975, the Geothermal Energy Resources Act. That was following the Arab oil embargo, and when President Carter went on TV in a sweater in a fit of national anxiety and told everyone they had to turn down their thermostats, and we were looking for new sources of energy. Well, Texas passed the Geothermal Resources Act of 1975, still on the books in the Natural Resources Code, Chapter 141. Anyway, in that law, it said, and still says, geothermal energy shall be produced and regulated as a mineral. Well, that led a whole lot of people to think that the legislature had declared that geothermal energy is a mineral. So if you have a split estate, the oil, gas, and mineral estate and the surface estate, people thought, well, it must be part of the mineral estate. And the geothermal energy industry really didn't care what the answer is. What they need is business certainty. If you're going to go do a lease to do geothermal energy, you need to know who the owner is so that you can get the rights and you can pay the royalties. Well, I looked at the law, and you all know words matter. When it comes to legislation, words matter. Punctuation matters. A comma can make the difference in the meaning of a statute. Well, the statute said that geothermal energy shall be regulated and produced as a mineral. It didn't say it is a mineral. And so when I looked at the law and compared it to oil, gas, and mineral law, to me the answer immediately became apparent. In Texas, a mineral is a substance. It's something tangible. You can touch it. You might not want to touch it, but you can touch it. Oil, gas, gold, silver, uranium. Well, heat and energy are not substances. Heat and energy is an intangible quality of the rock itself. Well, what's the surface estate? The surface estate doesn't just mean the top of the earth. The surface estate means everything except the minerals. So it's that old analogy of the bundle of sticks. You take away one stick, the minerals, everything else remains. So all the rock under the earth except the minerals belongs to the surface estate. Heat and energy is a quality of the rock, therefore it belongs to the surface estate. What's the other part of geothermal energy? Hot water, hot brine, steam, and geopressured water. Well, it's black letter law in Texas that groundwater belongs to the surface estate. So we got heat, energy, hot water, hot brine, and geopressured water. It must belong to the surface estate. So we went to the legislature in 2023 and said, hey, would you guys pass a law so that we can have some clarity? We can probably get the right answer through the courts, but God knows how long that's going to take. We need clarity because there's this fantastic energy source and we got to get going. So the legislature said yes, and they passed this overwhelmingly. There was only one vote against it in the Senate, and I believe that was a voting machine malfunction. The legislature has strongly supported from both sides of the aisle our legislation. What else has the legislature done? Senate Bill 786, this consolidates jurisdiction under the Railroad Commission, one-stop shopping, if you will. Senate Bill 1210 is a really cool bill, in my opinion. It allows abandoned oil and gas wells to be adopted by geothermal operators. We had a statute on the books that I helped write back in the early 2000s that allows oil and gas operators to adopt oil and gas wells, but no one had ever thought about geothermal, so we made a simple amendment. The other cool thing that bill did is it creates a definition of an energy conservation well. The reason we called it an energy conservation well is because the word storage is under scrutiny by the legislature, right? You all are familiar about the concerns about battery. So it's really an energy storage well, but we didn't want to call it that because of the treading lightly over that. So one night after I'd had a few drinks, I said, aha, I'll call it an energy conservation well. And it passed. And it's a well that is used for the retention of energy that may be used to provide dispatchable generation of electricity for the power grid. Okay, so as Dr. Adams talked about a little bit, this is a really cool technology. You can use abandoned oil and gas wells, or you can drill new wells. But what they can do is, the way they're constructed is through a series of lateral wells. They can run 24/7. So as one well expels water and makes electricity, another lateral is having water put into it, so it works in a cycle. The point is, these can be paired with wind and solar, and it turns wind and solar into dispatchable energy. When the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, you turn these on and they go. The first one is online just south of San Antonio right now. What else did they do? You all are aware of the Texas Energy Fund. Well, that fund is for dispatchable energy. Geothermal energy qualifies. The next bill to wrap a ribbon around that was last session, Senate Bill 1762. This clarifies that geothermal energy conservation storage wells are eligible. The reason is because there was confusion, because batteries are not eligible. Well, a geothermal energy conservation well acts like a battery, so there was confusion whether it was or was not eligible, so we passed a law that says, look, it's not a battery. It's like a battery, but it's not a battery, and it is eligible. And finally, like Dr. Adams was talking about, we're seeing this really cool technology of not electricity production, but how to use the earth for heating and cooling. And you all, the legislature, passed a bill that authorizes municipal management districts to include these types of systems in their improvement projects and to finance them through bonds. The Railroad Commission is working on regulations. They've adopted regulations for the shallow building residential type systems. That was the low-hanging fruit. They're now working on the much more complicated set of regulations for deep commercial scale electricity production, and that's underway, and we think it's going to be the model for the nation. The federal government is behind this strongly.
I didn't mean to interrupt your thought, though.
Sure.
Just, going back to the Texas Energy Fund, did you say that there were any projects that have applied or received Texas Energy?
I did not say that. One of the problems was it was inaccurate, but there was a confusion in a lot of statements that geothermal did not qualify because basically renewables didn't qualify. So there's this feeling or belief that geothermal didn't qualify, but they do.
Okay.
We got that on the record in the Senate Business and Commerce. The last Senate Business and Commerce hearing of the session established that on the record.
Perfect. But do you know of any that are applying or receiving?
Well, the problem is the time to apply for the loans has expired.
Okay.
If they get them on fast enough and they're at least 100 megawatts, that's something that you all can decide whether that should be changed. They're still eligible for completion bonuses, but the time's expired for the loans, and I'm not aware of any that are about to come online in order to get the completion bonus.
Okay.
Federal governments, yes, sir.
Is there any active use cases on abandoned oil wells being turned over to geothermal operators?
Yes, Sage Geosystems is using a natural gas well in deep Texas. Um, I should probably clarify. Most of the oil and gas wells are right now at the stage of technology. They're not wide enough for a good geothermal energy electricity production well, but they can be used really good for test wells or for these storage wells. It's possible that as technology and efficiencies improve, they could use existing well bores. Also, part of the problem is mechanical integrity. A lot of these old wells don't have good mechanical integrity. But look, we've got a huge abandoned oil and gas well problem. This is not the panacea. It's helpful, but we could talk about how to solve that, but that's a bigger, different question. Yes, sir.
Severance tax apply to geothermal?
Say again?
Severance tax, does it apply to geothermal?
Not now, no. There's an oil and gas severance tax, and don't get any ideas on a new tax. No, it does not apply right now. Federal government is behind it in a big way. Patricia needs me to talk faster, so there's examples. The point is the feds are behind this. Both sides of the aisle are behind it. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, I'm not going to talk about politics, but that's a name that everyone recognizes. It extended the tax credits for geothermal. So the feds are behind it. The Secretary of Energy is a big supporter of geothermal. This is cool. The United States Department of Defense is behind geothermal energy in a really, really big way. Among other things, they have decided, this is official policy of the Department of Defense or Department of War, I don't know what to call it anymore, but they have decided that there will be a geothermal energy microgrid on every Army base, not just in the United States, but around the world by 2035. And if you think about it, this makes sense because, God forbid, what do we and our enemies attack in the event of war? They attack electricity generation. Well, if your generation comes from underground and it's in the middle of an Army base, it's going to be much more defendable. Yes, sir.
On that point, do you have any idea what the size of the generators for each Army base would be, or is that just still too far in the future to determine?
Yeah,
as far as like megawatts go, is it going to be like
enough to power
a 50 megawatt or like a gigawatt facility? Like
enough to power the base.
Yeah,
and,
it depends on the base, right?
and
But
eventually
in the tens to maybe 50 megawatt kind of scale.
Your answer is it depends?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Some are very small, and so they don't have much much demand. But yeah, for the most part, sub 100 megawatt.
and
I don't know of any base that has participated in these programs that are above that from the power that they've requested.
But for those of you who have military facilities in your districts, there's a lot of projects going on right now with various bases. There's a project going on at the U.S. Air Force NASA base in Houston. There's one in Corpus Christi. There's one out in El Paso. There's several in San Antonio. It is happening. You don't see it a lot because they haven't been built yet, but it's in the process. Moving on, we've all heard the scary projections out of ERCOT and from the prognosticators about the ginormous increase in electricity demand, AI, data centers, etc. The real question is, well, where is the power going to come from? How are we going to make supply and demand be in harmony? Well, that report, again, that was in your reading assignment, it discusses it. And again, this isn't me talking. This is every leading university in Texas got together to do a report on the future of geothermal in Texas. Well, they reached what I thought was an astonishing conclusion. This report from the leading universities in Texas concluded that electricity from geothermal could equal the amount of electricity we currently get from hydrocarbons in as little as 4 years. That's pretty good stuff. That's something that I think the legislature needs to know about. And again, it's not just me, an advocate, it's what our universities have concluded. But it would require a shift of economics and activity that are equal to the shale revolution. But my point is, as I'm going to illustrate, we have that ability sitting out at the drill rig lots right now. When the shale revolution happened, Texas revolutionized international geopolitics. We turned the United States from being the #1 oil importing country in the world to the #1 producer of oil and natural gas in the world. We created a whole new Saudi Arabia of oil, right? The shale revolution was a big deal, and it still is. Well, the potential for geothermal is there, and in my opinion, it's even bigger. So Texas, we're sitting on, you guys are involved in the policy. We are once again ready to disrupt the narratives about energy.
And we're really short on time. I was wondering if you could go to some recommendations.
Yeah, but I'd like to finish this point. Real quickly, my point is, it's right here. We don't have to invent new technology or new drilling rigs. In 1999, the year before Mitchell figured out how to unlock oil and gas, we drilled a little more than 5,000 wells. After the shale revolution, we drilled 15 to 20,000 wells. We peaked in 2014 with 28,000 plus wells. We still drill a lot. The reason we're not drilling as much now is because we can do multiple laterals from one well pad. But using conservative assumptions, these universities concluded that if we drilled 15,000 geothermal wells a year, and we have that ability sitting in the lots now. If we took that and applied it to geothermal well, 15,000 wells a year in 4 years, we would have the same amount of electricity from geothermal that natural gas, oil, and coal produces now. And I'm not talking about replacing that. We don't want to replace it. We want to add to it. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to say we're going to take over natural gas production. In 2023, we had $2 billion invested in geothermal. Wind had $200 billion. Imagine if we could do that for geothermal. In 1859, Edwin Drake drilled the first oil and gas well. Well, back then, it was considered really expensive, difficult, costly to try to get oil out of the ground. People now say, well, geothermal, it's too expensive, it's costly, it's too difficult. The oil and gas industry led to advancements in human standard of living that were unimaginable in 1859. Look, human creativity and brilliance has no limits. Folks, we can dig holes. We can apply oil and gas technology and unlock the unlimited, abundant, perpetual power of geothermal. Now I'm finished.
Awesome. Nice job. All right, so I told you I was coming back. So let's talk about some of the nitty gritty. I just thought it was a great. I'm supposed to stay over here. All right. So let's what can we do? What can get projects going, right? And this is again text heavy slide, but hopefully you can read it later. But the idea to address some of the cost, risk, right, issues that we talked about. One thing could be looking at an insurance program for first well risk. Actually, Europe does this quite a bit, but basically, as I said, it costs a lot of money to drill those first wells to confirm a resource is there. In the case of geothermal, there could be basically some sort of fund, a shared risk pool, whatever. There's a lot of ways to do this, but an insurance program that would reimburse a geothermal company if a well fails. If you drill that well, it doesn't do what you want to do, right? Didn't confirm the resource, etc. Right? That's huge, and actually, it's why geothermal is really pretty big in Europe. So that's one. Milestone-based procurement. So, as I said, projects really need committed PPAs or offtake agreements, right, to get going. And so, one way to do this is to look at, and this may not cost anything, but look at what state and/or quasi-public entities could do in terms of the procurement rules for power, right? So that they're essentially a little more geothermal friendly, is how I would put that. So that they're staged, right? So they're milestone-based rather than some of the more strict rules that are out there. So that's something to do. Demos, you talked about reusing oil and gas wells. I've talked to some of the representatives and offices about this. Is frankly putting some money up for demonstrations to look at could some of these wells be reused, and maybe fund kind of a limited portfolio of projects across the state, because as you know, it depends, right? The geology is varying, the demand is different across different regions, and so understanding what developments would look like across the state, inside and outside of ERCOT, right? Because then, obviously the state regulates, the PUCT still regulates, right, in all of Texas in the non-ERCOT areas, but gosh, talk about a hard place to do power projects, right, outside of ERCOT, where your interconnection queues are 8 years long, and you all know the issues, right? And so I think, those are some ideas, and that's not an all-inclusive list, but those are some ideas to kind of get things moving, get more companies working towards this. And then I think once those first projects are up and running, how do you enable scale? We talked about this, Texas Energy Fund. Most geothermal projects aren't more than 100 megawatts. They're just, that's a big geothermal project, frankly. So, being able to maybe tap into the TEF for low interest loans, super important. The financing is very important. So what am I calling this one? Reliability value mechanisms. It was kind of a buzzwordy way, but basically what it's saying is the value that geothermal brings to the table is fairly wide, okay? There's a lot of things it does well. It's base load, it's emission-free, right? But it brings heat, so you can do a lot of things with thermal. That value is the grid scale wants that, right? It's easy to, frankly, interconnect 50 megawatts of base load than 50 megawatts of a variable intermittent resource like wind or solar, right? But where that value is realized is at the customer scale. And what is the individual customer doing? And I don't necessarily mean I mean more like large, say, industrial customer. They're just looking at price, right? And on a levelized cost standpoint, geothermal for just power is going to be more expensive, okay, than wind, solar, et cetera. And that's largely because the grid absorbs that intermittency of wind and solar. Right? And so looking at a way to look at other revenue sources for geothermal, like ancillary services, some of the more, well, we won't call them storage, more of the conservation type technologies, and again, outside of ERCOT, really allowing like the regulated utilities and co-ops to work on pilots and things with cost caps, right? Because I think that's maybe a big fear of a lot of these, say a municipality, like, well, how much is this going to cost, and is this going to be a quagmire because it's going to, cost will balloon like crazy. And then thinking about, look, the addressing the risk, and what I really mean is the sort of the financeable risk, and can there be an established risk pool, a fund, an insurance, something like that that would support the industry to help offset, frankly, the risk that they have to take. So that's it. I mean, I think we got to get stuff going. Once stuff launches, obviously the market can help take over and grow these technologies. But we're at that stage where we just kind of really need to get on the board and get moving, and frankly prove to investors, the public, you all, that geothermal is a viable and scalable energy source. So there we go. That's all we got. Happy to take questions. I threw some up here, but yeah.
Were there, when we heard from nuclear, they talked about crossover applications, medical isotopes, and maybe desalination, produced water, that kind of stuff. There any potential crossover applications? I mean, I don't think we're looking at medical isotopes here, but maybe desal, use of produced water, anything that is on the horizon or that people are looking at?
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point, because a lot of the times, stacking revenue streams for projects helps them get moving. So, for instance, direct lithium extraction, right, has been tacked on to some geothermal projects because you're already bringing that brine that has lithium in it to the surface. So you're just tacking that on to a processing to an already existing facility. So yeah, and most desalination technologies or produced water treatment technologies need heat, right? They're thermal processes for the most part. And in my opinion, I think that using electricity to generate heat is, especially in the Permian, for instance, is a very inefficient use of a scarce resource. And what does the Permian have? A ton of natural gas, a ton of produced, right? Associated gas, produced gas. That's kind of worthless as a molecule, but maybe worth something, certainly worth more to turn into power, but also to be used for some of these. So I think there's this, where I'm going with this is, I think there's an opportunity for synergies and hybrids between different technologies. But it's the devil's in the details of how to, structuring a project that makes sense in terms of inputs and outputs at every little step. Yeah.
I'm a big believer in recycling of produced water. He's talking about the gunk that comes up out of an oil and gas well that's not oil or gas. It's the ancient seawater that got trapped with the oil and gas by Mother Nature. And if you ever want to talk about produced water offline, oddly, I can do that. You can use produced water in geothermal systems, and you can use the electricity from geothermal systems just like you can from a small modular nuke to run the recycling and treatment technology. But I think real interesting is the extraction of brine. There's some projects that are moving forward, even though we don't have primacy from the EPA, that up in the Smackover region that will be doing exactly that. But that's not produced water. Who else? I know we got lunch, so no one's going to ask questions. Yes.
You mentioned the use of fracking technology. Is there a risk of seismic activity related to geothermal production?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question is using fracking technology or hydraulic fracturing for enhanced geothermal systems, is there a risk of induced seismicity or creating earthquakes? There's always a risk, right? And so you have to do it right. We know how to do it right. I mean, the industry knows how to do it right. All the projects that are currently, at least certainly that are funded by the DOE, have extremely strict requirements on seismic monitoring, doing surveys before you do anything, comparing it to the background seismicity to ensure that's not happening. The main reason that seismicity can be induced is largely due to produced water or saltwater disposal wells, re-injection of wells from oil and gas, not fracking actually. And that's because they go way down deep. They go to the basement rock, which is like go through the sediments, get to the granite. That's way down there. Basement rock is where you actually connect a lot of these faults where the earth can move in a big way. And so you kind of lubricate the faults with this water and cause shifts in the earth. Not that that can't happen shallower, but the faults are much smaller in terms of their offset. So long story is yes, but it can be mitigated.
I think that's the key takeaway is the induced seismicity is really happening from the disposal wells and accidentally lubricating the fault lines so there's a shift. Not so much hydraulic fracking.
But good question. I mean, I think just thinking about policy and public perception and things like that, I think getting out in front, I mean, y'all are here and it's great that you're educating yourselves about this stuff, but in Europe, there have been some, unfortunate, I would call them mistakes, right, with geothermal, which is, preventable mistakes in terms of induced seismicity causing earthquakes, knocking down, ancient buildings because you drilled right next to one. Okay, well, so, I think that helping people understand that and ensuring that the policy and the regulation are there to ensure that it's done right as well.
Yes, sir.
Were geothermal generators, are they eligible for a lot of the ancillary services in the ERCOT market or no?
I mean, they're spin resource, right? So depending on what you're using, yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a laundry list, right, of those. Do you know? I probably don't know enough about all the different, they're not going to be like fast frequency response or stuff like that, but they're basically grid inertia, right? They're just like all the other thermal generation, natural gas or nuclear or whatever.
Well, so it sounds like I'm a big general fan of geothermal. I mean, broadly speaking, it sounds like the financial viability is the big barrier. So, I mean, if y'all are able to avail yourselves of additional revenue streams, I would think that would help.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, demand response. I think there are a lot of ways that you could structure other kind of revenue streams for projects, but you got to be careful about sort of picking winners and losers. I know like batteries are apparently evil now or whatever. So, so I think it depends. They're not going to be, so for energy storage, for instance, using geothermal wells for energy storage, that just the physics of it, you can almost kind of think of it as an artificial geothermal resource. Probably the best way to think about it. So it's not that these are going to they're going to be able to respond in milliseconds like a battery can, right? They got to spin up a generator and it's going to take minutes at the very least.
But pretty darn fast.
Yeah, I mean, fast, certainly, peaker plant type response.
No, I like the way you're thinking. I don't know, I don't have a detailed answer for you because I haven't had a client hire me to work on that project and get the answers. But I'd really like the way you're thinking for it. But to get back to what will really get it going, in my opinion, the takeaway is we got to get these first few plants online that prove affordable electricity can come from geothermal. That's what's going to get it going. And they're coming on now. Ever has brought their plants on in Europe. Now, as Dr. Adams says, they have a different electricity market than we do. Fervo is bringing theirs on now, and they are able to sell into the electricity market in California. But these are coming on. Once they come on, it's going to take off.
Any other questions?
What else?
If there's not, I'm sure we can talk over lunch.